On this video, I would like to share a brief meditation of 7 great truths concerning Jesus Christ from the book of Hebrews, chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. I'm going to read it from the Greek, translate it, and then make interpretation or give interpretation and application. It reads, palumeros kai palutrapos palachataas la lesas tois patrasin en tois prophetais ep escatu ton hemeron tuton elalesen hemen en huio. That is, in many parts and in many ways, God of old, having spoken to the fathers in the prophets, in these last days spoke to us in the Son. Notice there were many parts and many ways that God spoke through the prophets. The writer of Hebrews is telling us. Sometimes he spoke through dreams, like in the case of Joseph. Other times he spoke through different visions, like, let's say, in the prophets, Ezekiel. Sometimes he spoke directly, like to Moses. And in various times as well, you had him speaking during the patriarchal period, during the time of Moses, during the time of the kings and the prophets. So in many parts, and in many ways, God of old, having spoken to the fathers in the prophets in these last days. Now, notice here the writer of Hebrews believes the last days start with Christ and his advent. In these last days, he spoke to us in the Son. And when he says that, in huio, he spoke to us, I believe the writer's mind is back in Psalm 2, a coronation psalm in which, as we move through the psalm, the psalmist then gives the decree of Yahweh. He says, you are my son, Beni ata, ani hayom yeliticha. You are my son, this day have I given birth to you. And I believe that's where the writer of Hebrews is coming from, thinking out of Psalm 1. And how Jesus now is the final king in whom the Lord has spoken. And notice there's 7 things about the Son. Han ethekin kleranaman panton. That is, whom he placed heir of all things. Jesus Christ is heir of everything. Psalm 2 says, ask of me, and I'll give you the nations for your inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for your possession. All you have to do is ask me. And it's interesting, in the New Testament, believers in Jesus Christ are joint heirs with him. Paul says we are heirs and joint heirs with Christ. What a beautiful thought that Paul speaks of in Romans. Then we go on. Number 2, through whom he made the ages. The Greek word ionos looks at the universe. Through whom, that is, through Christ, the universe was made. I'm reminded of John 1, verse 3. Panta dia tua geneta, kai koresa tua geneta, udechen hageganin. That is, all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made which has been made. So Jesus is the agent of creation. All things were made through him. I'm amazed when I think about that. They tell us that the nearest galaxy, and I was looking this up on Google and quoting what I found, is 2 million light years away. traveling at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. It would take us 2 million light years of travel time to get to the nearest galaxy. In 2 seconds, we zip past the moon. We would still, in a spaceship, have that much time to travel, or that much travel time. They also tell us that the Earth will fit into the sun 1.3 million times from what I checked out on Google. It's interesting when we think about that Jesus made that, through whom he made the ionos. He made the universe or the ages. Then number 3, Has on apaugasma tes doxes. That is, who being the radiance of the glory. The word here, apaugasma, means radiance. It can mean reflection, but primarily it's the radiance. He radiates the glory of God. And we see the glory of God radiated at Mount Sinai, and Jesus is the effulgence, is another word that ministers have used, the effulgence or the radiation of the glory. That is, he shows us the very glory of God in all of its fullness and splendor. And then number 4, he also is the karakter tes hupastaseos autou. That is, he's the exact stamp, the karakter of his very essence. In other words, when we think of Jesus, we need to realize he is totally equal with God the Father. He is the exact stamp, the writer of Hebrews is saying, of the very essence of who God is. If you've seen me, Jesus will say, you've seen the Father. And then he bears all things along by the word of his power. Notice, Feron tetapan tato chremati tes dunamaos autou. That is, he's bearing all things along. He bears history along. He bears the universe along. And he does it by just speaking, by the word of his power. I remember years ago, as a boy, my parents had a man moving a piano. And he was a very big man. And on this particular night, he had had too much to drink. And he was somewhat inebriated. And as a young boy, I said, you know, you look so strong. Do you think you could take my father and lift him over your head? And he said, no problem, young man. So he grabbed my dad and did a press with him. And of course, I was in trouble afterwards. But I've often thought how impressed I was that this man, full of muscles, could do that. But that's nothing compared to what Christ does. He just speaks. And he bears everything along. Doesn't even flex a bicep, just speaking. Then the writer of Hebrews goes on, Katharisman ton hamartion poiesamenos, that is, having made a purification of sin. Having made once for all himself is the Greek here, a purging once for all for sins. My mind goes to Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, how that the priest would be going in every year to make atonement for 1 year, or to cover for 1 year. But Jesus Christ, by one offering forever, sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. So we're told, by one sacrifice, it is now finished. So making himself a purging of our sins. And number 7, he then sat down at the right side of the Majesty on high. It reads, Ekathasin in doxiates megalosunes in hupselois. That is, Having made a purification for sins, he sat down on the right side of the Majesty on high. Jesus is now seated at the right hand of God the Father. And I'm reminded of Psalm 110. I love the Hebrew of that. Ne'um Adonai Ladoni. The Lord said to my Lord, Shave lemini arashid oyevecha hadom leraglecha. That is, set at my right side until I make your enemies the footstool of your feet. Jesus Christ is seated at the right hand of God the Father now from the ascension up to this time, and he must reign until he put all enemies under his feet. And Paul tells us that the last enemy that will be defeated will be death. Christ has conquered Satan, sin, and death, but it will be finally defeated at his second advent after he comes from the Father's right hand to reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. When I look at these 7 particulars, I think really, as we are looking forward to Christmas, that we need to bow down and adore Jesus Christ, who is heir of all things, through whom he made the universe. Number 3, who is the radiance of the glory. He's the exact stamp of the very essence of God. Number 4. And then he bears all things along by his spoken word. Number 5. Number 6, having made a final purging of sins, a purification. Finally, 7, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Let us adore him. Let us worship him as the eternal Melech Melechim, King of Kings, and Adon Adonai, Lord of Lords. There is the great hymn. It reads, O come, all ye faithful, joyful and triumphant. O come ye to Bethlehem. Come and behold him, born the King of angels. O come, let us adore him. O come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord. And I pray that that will be our passion, to adore Jesus Christ during this season and then every day as we worship him in this sevenfold greatness of who he is.